This man knows Donald Trump so well. He served in his first presidency, and this is his verdict.
I don't think Trump is fit to be president.
That's his former national security advisor, John Bolton, who I think we can be honest, Kamal, is no longer on his Christmas card list.
With friends like that, who needs enemies?
But John Bolton, in a fascinating interview with the Daily Tea, does lay bare the debate at the heart of US politics, which is essentially who would be better or worse for the world, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
And in today's episode, we are going to answer that very question.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Camilla Tominey.
And me, Kamal Ahmed. Camilla, let's kick off with where the polls are.
Yes.
As we look ahead to November and the election, thrown into a degree of confusion, of course, when Joe Biden stood down as the nomination for the Democrats. Kamala Harris, as we covered last week, has just finished the Democratic National Convention. And from being in a position when Joe Biden was still the candidate to be president of almost certainly looking like they were going to lose, the polls are now saying they are neck and neck. Some saying Harris has got a small lead.
Which is extraordinary because if you look back at her polling when she was vice president, she was the least popular vice president for a millennium. And I say that not easily because is it millennium or millennia?
In this millennia, maybe. I don't know for a millennium, given that America is only 200 and some years old. So maybe not a millennium.
It's getting a bit Star Wars. But let me just hit you with some more stats because her approval rate, recent history seems to have completely washed over the fact that Harris has never been very popular at all. Okay, so her approval rating is minus 17 now. Comparatively, Mike Pence was on minus 8. Even Joe Biden was more popular on minus 5. Dick Cheney was very popular. He was on plus 10. Who do you think was the most popular vice president in recent history?
No idea.
Al Gore, plus 30. You'd die for those stats. So what I think is interesting is suddenly this, second coming of Kamala Harris. And isn't she amazing? Why? What's so great about this woman who everyone hated as vice president?
Because, I'm not sure everyone hated her, because...
Quite a few people did.
Because she has reset the terms of the debate. She is the younger female candidate. Suddenly, Donald Trump has got a new role. He is the old man. He was fighting the older man, and in that position, his drive was all about, I'm fitter, I'm better, I'm cleverer than that guy. Those attack lines on the Democrats have failed against Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump has struggled to think, how do I reframe the argument now that I'm fighting somebody who is 20 years younger than I am? What
Yes.
Kamala Harris has done is she has given something for the people who thought Joe Biden was not fit to be president, the people who thought Donald Trump was not fit to be president, didn't like either of them. They're known sometimes as double haters. They hated both sides. Kamala Harris has given them a fresh chance to engage with the possibility of a Democratic candidate. That is why it has changed.
So depressing, though, because basically Harris is not quite as bad as Biden, but she's still bad versus somebody who many Republicans like but others don't like in Trump. So we're still doing this weird comparison of bad versus a little bit less bad. Who is worse? The question in American politics right now isn't who would be better for the world. It would be like, what is the least worst option? And I don't quite understand this recasting of Harris, who strikes me, I've already made a comparison between her and Meghan. Okay, we're talking about somebody who has been for quite some time a figure of ridicule. There is absolutely no substance to most of the things that she says in her strangely chat show, giggly, word salad way. She has no foreign policy experience whatsoever. She is awkward. She is not at all stateswoman-like in my mind. She gets things confused really, really quickly and embarrasses herself. She talks about being this kind of woman's empowerment champion, and yet at the same time is part of an administration that can't define what a woman is and has referred to mothers as birthing people and other such nonsense. She advocates puberty blockers and non-reversible gender realignment. She is pro-abortion, but so much so that she can't draw a dividing line between early and late abortion. So she supported legislation which wants to put no limits on abortion whatsoever, which even most progressive women think is odd, or find the notion of somebody aborting a baby at 39 weeks deeply uncomfortable. So she's sort of being held up as this figure of hope over fear by the Democrats, when the Democrats aren't being very honest with themselves, because they know that she's inadequate.
I think
Who thinks this woman is a perfect solution for the Democrats? Why is there this rewriting of history about her?
Nobody has said, Camilla, that she is the perfect candidate. She is a candidate that has motivated Democratic voters. She has raised record amounts of money since she was since she started the journey to becoming the official candidate for the Democrats. Of course, no candidate to be president of the United States is risk-free. She has shown in her appearances on the committee systems in Congress to be a fiery questioner of many government officials. Yeah. She has told a story about a woman who came from a hard-working immigrant family, lived the American dream.
But just to clarify on that, with regard to kind of connections to the Rust Belt, which is always important for these candidates.
She has no connections to the Rust Belt, that's for sure. She's Californian to her bootstraps.
And her parents were both professors. So she's had a very middle-class upbringing. Let's just clarify that. She's not born in a cardboard box in the middle of the street.
She certainly wasn't born in a cardboard box, as far as I'm aware. But there is the story of hard work of her parents, yes, in academia. Nothing wrong with that. But that's not hugely well paid. And then working her way up to be a respected lawyer, becoming Attorney General in San Francisco.
Yeah, and I accept that, and I accept that she is a hugely successful woman, and I congratulate her for that. Whether she is presidential material is another matter. I don't like the disingenuity of the Democrats and their supporters making out that this woman is better than she actually is. She isn't as bad as Biden, but that's a low bar. And now the debate is about whether she's as bad or worse than Trump, which is a stunningly depressing sort of, if we were all playing limbo, my God, the bamboo is literally touching the floor. That's how low we're getting.
The debate is not whether is she worse than Trump. The debate is she better? Is she the better option for America than Trump? And also, it is a little different from Biden. I have a huge sympathy with your criticism of the Democratic Party supporting Biden when most of them knew, and the media knew, that he was not functioning at the level that meant he could be the candidate. There was dishonesty there. I absolutely agree with that. That doesn't mean that saying that Kamala Harris is not a strong candidate because there aren't weaknesses sitting there that everyone knows but no one's talking about. That's not clear.
But the left is always a bit more dishonest, I think, about the foibles of its candidates than the right.
Have the Republicans been talking about the people who support Trump, about Trump's foibles and weaknesses, about JD Vance and his anti-abortion?
Lots of people on the right talk about Trump as if he's a figure of ridicule, but perhaps the least bad option. Apart from your Make America Great Again hat-wearing folk, I don't see many, in inverted commas, sensible righties saying unequivocally they think that Trump is this big orange dream sent from God, okay? In the same way that when Boris Johnson, who many of us in this newsroom had worked with, was suddenly a candidate for Prime Minister, a lot of sensible righties turned around and said, I'm not sure this is a brilliant idea. And by the way, often the right-wing politicians of this world get brought down by right-wing publications. But on the left, the Democrats and their supporters and the left don't seem to want to call out the problems in their midst, and then that causes them more problems. We had a little bit of this yesterday, where some aspects of the left are still salivating over this Keir Starmer speech, which was dreadful and exposed a load of his flaws, but people are just so happy to have a left-wing administration, they're quite happy to paper over these cracks. I suppose that's what I'm generally objecting to. I just don't think she's as good as people are saying she is, and to make it worse, I think deep down the people who are saying that she's great don't actually believe it. And that's therefore selling a lie to the American people, although in a democracy, Kamal, they can judge her for themselves. We were talking yesterday about Keir Starmer, and I made the remark that he hasn't got it. I think we both agree he doesn't really have it. And I don't think she does either. And I don't like the dishonesty, once again, of the left and of Democrats, pretending that their candidate is better than they are. They spent years doing this
That's
with
politics,
Biden.
Camilla.
I know it is. But you know what? Both sides could have done better. OK, the Democrats, rather than spending the last 4 years trying to dethrone Trump, throw Trump in prison, nail Trump for anything they could have spent that time cultivating a much, much, much better successor to Biden than Harris. And equally, on the Republican side, when we have these people like JD Vance being completely two-faced, oh, 1 minute I'm a never Trumper, the next I'm his pick for vice president. If they had also cultivated a better successor than this big orange joke, they would also be in a better position. What I'm railing against is the dishonesty of it all, the dishonesty of the Democrats, hailing this woman as the next Messiah, you know, when she's not even Bryant. She's nowhere near it.
What Kamala Harris needs to do is put herself in an environment that tests her.
Yes.
What we've not seen yet. She has been able to just take the stage, say her message, and then move on to the next thing. She hasn't done any mainstream television interviews, which are an important part of the American political process. With her running mate, Tim Walz, she has now agreed to do a CNN interview. And I think that will be really important to see the quality of her policy proposals. As I said last week when we were covering the DNC, her policies on what she describes as price gouging, profiteering by supermarkets, is, in market sense, economically illiterate. There's no evidence for it. And actually, if the federal state then starts leaning into it, that will be a disaster. So that should be tested. And then on September the 10th, she has the first head-to-head with Donald Trump. And then I think, Camilla,
that would be good.
We can then make some decisions which would maybe enable us to test your analysis of whether Kamala Harris is up to it. I don't think we have enough evidence yet. She has only been the candidate for 8 weeks.
We don't have evidence yet. She has been vice president.
But the vice president in America is, unless something happens to the president, is quite ceremonial.
Although you look at the statistics for Al Gore and Dick Cheney, and that's because they made more of their role, because they were bigger and better politicians than she is. But I take your point. I can't wait to see this debate. Why did we think, by the way, that Trump said he didn't want to do this debate? Because his handling of her, by the way, has been appallingly bad. You and I spoke in a previous Daily Tea after he was nearly killed, the assassination attempt. Oh, this is a moment to reboot. This is a moment to be more reflective. He's come up with all of these personal attack lines that have only served to make him look even more grotesque. Let's hear from somebody not just who knows Trump better than most people, but also who remains at the heart of American politics to weigh up everything that we've been reflecting on. John Bolton's interview with you and Tim Stanley is coming up next.
Ambassador, this presidential election has changed dramatically since Joe Biden stood aside from the nomination and Kamala Harris picked it up. Does this make it more or less likely that Donald Trump will win?
Well, I think it makes it less likely. The Democrats could clearly see that if they kept Biden as their nominee, they would fall off an edge of a cliff. And the polling in the wake of the presidential debate, where Biden's problems were shown about as clearly as they could, indicated not only a big loss at the presidential level, but a substantial impact on what we call the down ballot races, Senate and House races, state and local races. As of today, Harris is essentially even with Trump at the presidential level, maybe a little bit ahead within the margin of error to be sure. And in the down ballot races, Democratic chances, unfortunately, from my perspective, look a lot better. So they're coming out of their convention now. I have to say they're getting rapturous media coverage as the media sort of shed any pretense of objectivity over this. I think she could actually get a measurable bounce out of the convention, which I had not expected. They've turned out all their former presidents and presidential candidates and entertainers. It's really been quite a show, and Trump has been all but invisible. In fact, to turn to his campaign for a second, I'd say that despite their statements they had a plan B in case Biden withdrew, there's no evidence of that. And again, ever since that presidential debate, they have been largely ineffective, which is unusual in a Trump campaign.
So does this prove that all along the problem was Biden? That really there was no Trump bounce, he wasn't going to win so long as they changed the candidate, that actually they were just waiting to get rid of Biden, and then the election would slip back to the Democrats because Trump is not that popular?
Well, I think what the Democrats are trying to do, and they have since Kamala Harris effectively wrapped up the nomination about 10 days after Biden withdrew, and certainly through their convention, is present her as the candidate of change, which may sound counterintuitive since she's the sitting vice president and Trump is the challenger. But I would have to say, not based on any polling evidence yet, but I would have to say they've been successful. They're saying, look, you know what Trump means. It's the same old chaos and confusion. Obama put it pretty well. You know, the sequel's never better than the original, and the original was pretty bad. So she could go into the post-Labor Day 2 months of intensive campaigning in a very good position. And again, without much evidence, Trump seems to know what to do about it.
Could we now say that although at the time it looked as though Trump had won the debate and benefited from it, it was now actually, we can now see it was actually a huge mistake to do it, because it gave away that Biden was ailing and gave the Democrats time to swap him out?
100% correct. It turns out, hindsight's always perfect, but it turns out that whoever advised to engage in that debate made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
If they had had that debate with Biden in September, then Trump would have won in a landslide with enormous down ballot consequences. That possibility obviously is gone now. Although I would say that the only debate that's been agreed to post both parties' conventions is September the 10th on ABC News. So if that is the one and only debate, that could be the most important thing between now and the election. If Kamala Harris performs well and Trump performs like Trump, that could be an enormous boost for her. If she finds herself unable to put 2 or 3 sentences together without a teleprompter in front of her, that could be big trouble for her.
This inability of Trump to adjust to the changing candidate and the changing situation, what does this tell us about him and his campaign team?
Well, I think it does play into the Democrats' narrative that this is just a compilation of golden oldies from what Trump has done since he entered the race in 2015. That it's nothing new. He doesn't have new policies. As usual, it's all about Donald Trump, which, after all, for him is the most important thing in the world. And he's not offering anything really new. They've tried this week of the Democratic convention to do what's called counter programming, to have Trump go out and give speeches on law and order, national security, economic policy. It's been a crashing failure from my perspective. He's obviously reading lines. He's bored out of his mind. He wants to attack Kamala Harris, and his advisors are telling him not to. I would say one other thing. The Trump campaign, unlike his 4 years in the White House, has been until now remarkably free of leaks and public backbiting. But now, day after day, you see stories about his advisors saying to him, talk about policy, talk about what you'll do looking forward, don't attack Kamala, don't attack personalities. And that's a sign that the advisors think the campaign's in trouble, and they're going to make it clear for history. It wasn't their fault. It's Trump's fault. That shows disunity within the campaign and is a real problem if it's true.
Ambassador Bolton, if you were still close to Donald Trump, and we'll get into your relationship with President Trump, obviously, as part of this conversation. But if you were advising now, not just Trump, but the Republican campaign, what should they be doing?
Well, I think they need to make some pretty dramatic changes. I mean, another thing the Democrats are doing, which absolutely galls me, is that they have transformed their issue from being saving democracy, which is what Biden was saying, protecting against Donald Trump and the repetition of January 6th. Their campaign's about freedom. Hey, wait a minute. I've got news for the Democrats. It's the Republican Party, the conservative Ronald Reagan Republican Party, that favors greater freedom, generally on issue after issue. And yet suddenly, because of their emphasis on things like abortion and those related issues, they're trying to make freedom the property of the Democratic Party, and Trump's letting them do it. That's a huge mistake from our point of view. We are the Libertarian Party. We're not all libertarians, but we're the more libertarian party. The Democrats are the party of government. Number two, they have gone back, again, highlighted at their convention, to Hubert Humphrey, who admittedly lost the presidency. But in 1968, I remember him talking about the politics of joy. And I thought to myself, what is this man talking about? Then came Ronald Reagan. And he had an upbeat, optimistic mood, probably one of the most famous political commercials in recent American history. Was in 1984 when he said, when the commercial said, "It's morning in America." And the Democrats are stealing the morning in America. Trump's dour, he complains, he's always being persecuted by somebody. The country is in disarray. We're becoming a third world country. The Democrats are optimistic, upbeat, and Hubert Humphrey and the politics of joy are winning. I tell you, I think Americans want optimism. We are optimistic by nature, and the Democrats are stealing it from Trump. They're not stealing it. He's giving it to them, and they're taking advantage of it.
As a Republican, how much do you think has Trump changed at all since you described him in your book as stunningly uninformed on how to run the White House, let alone the huge federal government, that his thinking was like an archipelago of dots, erratic, foolish, and irrational? Given how you've described him, Ambassador, who is the best candidate to win in November? From what you've said, some could infer that you actually think that Kamala Harris would make a better president of the United States than Donald Trump.
No, I'm a very unhappy voter. I was in 2020. I longed to vote for a real conservative Republican. In 2020, between Biden and Trump, there were no conservative Republicans on the ballot. So I live in Maryland, where you can write in names. I wrote in Dick Cheney, a longtime friend of mine and a true conservative Republican, and I'm going to do that again this November. It's two unattractive choices for real conservatives, and I think that's a statement as much about this election, but perhaps even more about the future of the Republican Party. Whether Trump wins or loses, the battle for the soul of the party, if you will, is still very much on.
Ambassador, in terms of Trump's record, though, he looks to me like one of the most successful conservative presidents of recent times. He got rid of Roe v. Wade, or at least his Supreme Court picks got rid of Roe v. Wade. He cut taxes. He introduced greater security at the border. There was peace when it comes to Russia. There are the Abraham Accords, which helped normalize Israel's relationship with the Arab states. He pulled out of the nuclear deal with Iran. On many things that conservatives have said for decades they want to do, but Republican administrations, in many cases, have failed to deliver, Donald Trump, whatever his rhetoric might be, did actually do what conservatives say they want Republicans to do.
Sure. Look, there were a lot of decisions he made in his first term that I agreed with, that I helped him accomplish. Pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal was in May of 2018. He had tried since January 2017 to do it, unable to do it. I came in April, and we were out within 30 days. So I thought that was a brilliant move by Donald Trump, needless to say. Essentially, every point you've just raised, every accomplishment, I agree with. I think they were correct decisions. And every other Republican who ran for the nomination in 2016 would have done exactly the same thing. So when you say what's Donald Trump's value added, really there isn't any. He has no philosophy. I'm not sure he's capable of it. He certainly doesn't have one. He doesn't engage in what we normally consider policy development. His decisions are ad hoc, transactional, and they're all filtered through the prism of how it benefits Donald Trump. So in that passage from the book you read about the archipelago of dots, his decisions are like neuron flashes. You can try and draw a line between them, but he can't even draw a line between them. And sometimes he makes a decision in the morning and changes it by the afternoon. The one thing that proved most powerful in getting him to make a particular decision, at least in the national security field when I was there, was arguing it was to his political benefit to take course A rather than course B. Now, every politician takes politics into account. There's no question about it. Very few only take politics into account, which is how I would describe Trump. In a second term, because of the 22nd Amendment, he can't run for president again.
Yeah. So
the threat of electoral consequences if he does the wrong thing is much reduced. And I think understanding that if he's elected and sworn in January of next year, he will be a lame duck from day one. And that's going to have an effect on him too. I think he's less likely to be restrained now, even by kind of conventional political thinking. It's really all going to be about Donald Trump.
Yeah. You say he has no coherent philosophy running through what he does. I mean, that would surprise a lot of people listening to this because they regard him as one of the most right-wing presidents that America has ever had. If he has no guiding philosophy, how do we account for that record of delivery for conservatives and that everything he has done has lent towards the right of the spectrum? If he had no guiding philosophy, we might have expected some individual policies that stand out as being from the left or as being entirely opportunistic. But no, he's really being consistently conservative in delivery.
I don't think so. He has no fiscal policy discipline whatever. Deficits rose substantially under his term. Why? Because it's other people's money. He doesn't care. If he can spend it and get the benefit from it, he's just as much of a big government spender as any Democrat you can find. He consistently favors low interest rates. Now, a real fiscal conservative who believes in a restrained growth of the money supply, a Friedmanite kind of conservative would say sometimes you need higher interest rates. Why does Trump always favor lower interest rates? Is there a philosophical basis to it? No, he's a real estate developer. They always favor lower interest rates. It doesn't matter what shape the economy's in. They want lower interest rates.
But how, if I may just ask, how unusual really is that? Ronald Reagan appointed someone to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor, who turned out to be a pro-choice vote on the Supreme Court. Ronald Reagan saw the deficit and debt increasing. So did George W. Bush, who not only spent more money, but also did things like expand medical benefits for seniors. It seems to me that isn't it just practical politics to give the public what they want? And that's what Republicans very often end up doing. Is he really that unusual?
Yes, I think he is. Nobody would have any trouble understanding why Reagan made decisions that were sometimes not conservative. I think the choice of Sandra Day O'Connor was a mistake that the administration took note of as they watched her on the Supreme Court, and it launched a process by which the selection of judicial nominees in Republican administrations became much more coherent with the objective of getting conservatives on the court. So that process was not what they followed with Sandra Day O'Connor. It was the more traditional process of, well, it'd be nice to appoint a woman to the court and so on and so forth. But I think we learned from that mistake. And the real accomplishment of Trump's judicial nominees, the three at the Supreme Court level and almost all the ones at the Court of Appeals and district court level, he had nothing to do with. It was his White House counsel, Don McGahn, and the Justice Department working in the way they had worked in the prior Bush and Reagan second terms that cranked out these nominations. Trump just signed them. He didn't know who they were, and he didn't care. If they were going to satisfy the evangelicals, that was all he cared about.
Not sure, Ambassador, I quite got to an answer. You talked about your frustrations as a Republican about how to vote on November the 5th. Can I take it then that you're sort of going to hold your nose and vote Republican, i.e. Trump, even though Kamala Harris has had the best of the campaign since the announcement that Joe Biden was not going to stand to be the next president of the United States?
No, I'm sorry. I thought I said I'm going to write in Dick Cheney's name for president. I'm not. It's a protest vote. I acknowledge that. Dick's not going to win. He's not even going to win Maryland, let alone anything else. But I don't think Trump is fit to be president. I don't think you can have any confidence in what he will do in a crisis in national security. We're very lucky in the first term, with the exception of COVID, which was a long-running crisis. We didn't face a hugely threatening international crisis, and thank God for that, because I don't have any confidence Trump would have the mental acuity to figure out what to do.
Given your expertise on the foreign stage, could we go through a few of the global crises that we are facing at the moment? Obviously, Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, has just returned from his 9th visit to the Middle East. No sign that we're really any closer to a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Can you see any way that progress can be made after the horrific events of October the 7th?
Well, I think one criticism about how the Biden administration has handled this crisis since October the 7th is its refusal to see it in what I think is the correct strategic picture. This was not an uprising of Palestinians against Israel. It was not a battle between Gazan civilians and Israel. It was an Iranian attack on Israel using Hamas, one of its terrorist proxies in the region, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, like the Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria. All of them, and others smaller, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others, all of them armed, equipped, trained, financed, given intelligence by Iran, not for the benefit of the terrorists, but to be part of a larger array of forces for Iran to deploy against the little Satan, what the Iranians call the Ring of Fire. I might say the Ring of Fire strategy applies not only to Israel, it applies to the Gulf Arab countries and Jordan as well, that are kind of caught in this same Ring of Fire. And if you look at it simply as a battle over Gaza, then issues which are important on that front of the war tend to overwhelm an appreciation of the bigger strategic threat that Israel is under and that Iran poses to peace and security in the region as a whole. Hence these negotiations over ceasefire for hostages, while certainly it tugs at your heartstrings and you understand the agony the hostages' families and friends are going through, is not a high strategic priority. That's a fact. I don't think these current negotiations will produce anything. The only caveat I'd make to that is that the Biden White House has put the Netanyahu government under extraordinary political pressure, unmeasurable amounts of pressure, and they may yet succumb to it. I think it would be a mistake, but I can't discount the possibility that the pressure might finally work.
Can I ask, how do you account for the Biden administration's attitude towards Israel? Hitherto, there's been a consensus in US politics on both sides that America backs Israel. But for the first time that I can remember, there's been a real debate and tension within the Democratic Party over that. And there's a feeling that may even be influential within the ticket. So is that a fair view, that the Democratic Party's views on Israel are changing? And does that account for its handling of Netanyahu?
Well, I think that's part of it. Let me come back to that if I can, because I think the first part of it is their view on Iran.
Right.
And it goes back to the view of the Obama administration and the Clinton administration before that. There is this obsession with the idea that if we could only convince the Ayatollahs that we had no hostile intent toward their regime, they would stop pursuing nuclear weapons, they would stop supporting terrorism, and sweetness and light would break out in the Middle East. I can't account for that. I think it's 180 degrees wrong in its perception. But the Biden administration came in determined to try and get back into the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which they saw as the Obama administration's international success counterpart to the Affordable Care Act in the Obama first term. And when Trump got out of it, that was like heresy. And they wanted to put it back, and they just ignored what Iran was doing in support of terrorist groups, such as we've now seen manifested by Hamas. They relieved pressure of the economic sanctions that Trump had reimposed after getting out of the nuclear deal. Oil purchases by China went up significantly. And yet, despite all just helping to fund their other activities like the nuclear program, like supporting the terrorists, and in time and time again, efforts to put more pressure on Iran were resisted because of this belief that the key to stability in the Middle East lay with mollifying the Ayatollahs. So that's the basis on which then I think what you've seen since October the 7th is the emergence, which stunned many Americans, certainly surprised me, of the left wing of the Democratic Party manifesting itself on foreign policy with an extraordinarily hostile view of Israel. I think a lot of it, honestly, is based on simple anti-Semitism. And I think we've seen that on some of the university campuses. But it's become a left-wing, Democratic Party left-wing ideological point as well. And that's the tightrope they're trying to walk. And I think Kamala Harris has indicated openness to that view, because the danger to the Democrats of losing swing states like Michigan, where that view is relatively strong, has them extremely worried.
Let's move on to Vladimir Putin and Russia, and obviously we're speaking to you from London and Europe. What should happen? What should be the next steps in the war in Ukraine? Are you of the opinion that it is time for some form of peace process to begin, or ceasefire process to begin, and that ultimately America and other Western nations can't continue to fund a war campaign for Ukraine? Or is your sense that we have to stick with Ukraine and continue to fund them, because the signal we would send Putin by any other approach would be far too negative?
Well, I think the distinction is between what we should do and what we probably will do. What we should do is continue to resist this aggression. The former prime minister of Finland was once asked a question: "What are the off ramps from this conflict?" And she said, "Off ramps? The off ramp is Russian troops leave the territory of Ukraine. That's the off ramp," and that remains true. Putin is playing on our short attention spans. Certainly in some countries in Europe, Germany promised a Zeitenwende in defense spending after the invasion. One can fairly ask now, what Zeitenwende? It came, and apparently it's gone. If Trump is elected, I'm very nervous about what will happen with respect to assistance to Ukraine. I'm very worried about what will happen to NATO if Trump gets elected. I think we've carried out the assistance in a very non-strategic fashion. I think this goes back to February of 2022 and one long series of arguments, mostly within the United States. Well, do we give them this weapon system or do we give them that weapon system? Rather than implying a strategic look to say, look, what do they need to win, and what do we need to give to them, and when do we need to get it to them? And I think even before that, the Biden administration failed to try and exercise deterrence. I think of note, the first major new deployments of Russian forces along the Russian-Ukraine border took place in February of 2021, 1 year before the actual invasion. And the consensus was then, well, the invasion's not imminent. But did anybody sit around and think, maybe it's not imminent, but maybe it's coming in a year? And how do we tell the Russians that's not going to work for them? We just didn't do it. So there are a lot of lessons to learn from Ukraine with the right president. And as I say, I worry about Donald Trump. I don't know what Kamala Harris will do, frankly. She has so little experience in foreign policy. But it may be we've passed the moment. I'm very worried about that.
In the case of Donald Trump, does his pick of JD Vance send a signal about what he'll do on Ukraine?
I fear that it does. Vance is smarter and more articulate than Trump. He's made himself into Trump's heir apparent, and Trump picked him, which surprised me. I didn't think Trump would ever do that, but he did. He picked his heir apparent, and Vance will be a faithful mouthpiece for what Trump wants to do on Ukraine. But he has said in public and in private, he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine. He takes this view that Europe should take care of Europe. Somebody in the Middle East should take care of the Middle East. We'll worry about China along its periphery in East Asia, ignoring the fact that there's a China-Russia axis going on, not perfectly formed yet, still some internal disagreements. China has aided Russia significantly in Russia's conduct of the war in Ukraine and fully expects Russian support if it makes a move against Taiwan or in the South China Sea. The international strategic environment is changing dramatically, and JD Vance is the embodiment of the American isolationist virus that says, let them worry about it.
Well, if he is the heir apparent, that brings me to the question of what happens next for the Republican Party. Because if Trump wins, you've got 4 years of Trump. Even if he loses, he'll still be very important, and then there's the heir apparent waiting in the wings. Is Trumpism just the future now of the Republican Party? Is this it for the foreseeable future?
Absolutely not. And the reason for that is there is no Trumpism. You know, if he simply went back to playing golf at his golf clubs, if he lost this November, there's nobody who can stand up and say, I'm the next Donald Trump, because he won't be telling them what his latest diversion is. You know, Vance won't be any stronger than Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz or some of these other performance artists who have somehow gotten into Congress. I'm not downplaying the amount of work or the extent of the struggle that's going to be necessary, but I've talked to many people around the country, and I am firmly of the view that the support that Trump gets from the Republican Party, and that he'll get in overwhelming percentages on Election Day, not from me, but from overwhelming percentages of Republicans, is with their teeth gritted, that they wish he weren't the nominee. They just fear Kamala Harris more. So I think the battle for the soul of the party begins the day after the election, frankly, whether he wins or loses. And I just make the point again, he is a lame duck. His runway is 4 years by definition. And I think people understand that. I think if you look at the class of senators who will be elected this November, their terms expire in 2030, 2 years after Trump will leave office. They're already in a post-Trump world, and others will be moving into it very quickly.
But what about the influence of this alternative media structure for Trump with people like Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson? Isn't there a kind of a movement outside, beyond Congress, which could keep this thing called populism going?
Well, it can certainly try, but I think, again, because Trump has not given a clear path, that there's nobody who can really pick it up. And, you know, Tucker Carlson has his following, but they're not on broadcast or cable TV anymore. And once Trump goes back to golfing, people's attention will turn to other things. We will see, I think, because of the undoubted leftward direction of a Harris administration, Republicans coming back together in opposition to her. And we'll get past this aberration, which is really what Trump is, this sort of like a disturbance in the force, to use a Star Wars term. Once that disturbance is gone, I think normality will reassert itself. The Republican Party is not the party of labor unions. It's a libertarian party. And I say that my father was a firefighter for the city of Baltimore. He was a union official. I'm not against unions. I'm a child of a union member. But what we favor is economic freedom, not putting the thumb on the scales for big business or big labor or anybody else. That's the Republican Party base, and it will reassert itself.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for your deep knowledge and very, very honest and candid answers. It's been great to have you on the Daily Tea.
Well, great to be with you.
I tell you the debate I would like to listen to, Kamal, and that is one between Trump and Bolton. Can you imagine getting those two into a room? just to fight it out. Also love the idea of him supporting, who we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, very popular Vice President Dick Cheney. No hope in hell of ever becoming president, well, at least at this stage. But it's fascinating to hear Bolton, who will always be tainted, ironically, by his association with the man he hates the most in the world, Trump himself, right?
Well, we can invite them both to join us on the Daily Tea, Camilla. And of course, we will be covering the American election fight right up to November and beyond. But do join us tomorrow for our regular Daily Tea, 5 p.m.